Episode 3. The parts of me that learned to be quiet. Come closer to the hearth. There's something I've been thinking about since our last conversation. In episode 2, I talked about what it feels like to live inside a body that sometimes feels like a stranger to me. And somewhere in that conversation, I started talking about singing, about dancing, about music, about the things I remember from childhood. Not necessarily as stories, but as sensations. Frequency, vibration, the feeling in my throat when I carried a note, the way my arms and legs wanted to move with the sound of music. And after I finished recording that episode, I kept thinking about those memories because there's something different about them. I don't remember very much of my childhood. There are enormous pieces of it that simply aren't there for me. But somehow, I remember that. I remember what it felt like to become completely lost in music. And I've started wondering if maybe those memories stayed with me because those were some of the moments when I was actually fully there. I've been trying to picture that little girl lately, and the thing that keeps coming to me is she didn't care what anybody thought of her. Not because she was particularly confident. I don't think she was standing there thinking, I'm going to be unapologetically myself. She wasn't thinking about herself at all. She wasn't singing because she wanted someone to hear her. She wasn't dancing because she wanted someone to watch her. She wasn't trying to impress anybody. She was just lost in her own world. And there's something about that I miss. The ability to experience something without simultaneously observing myself experiencing it. To sing without wondering how I sound. To move without wondering how I look. To enjoy something without wondering what somebody else might think my enjoyment means. There wasn't an audience in my head yet. At some point, there became one. I think I was somewhere around my early teens when I became really self-conscious about my voice. Adolescence makes you self-conscious anyways. You're becoming aware of your body, your identity, and how other people see you. But when I think back on that period, something else was happening too. The more I grew into myself, the more it felt like my mother found things about me to make fun of. My voice was one of them. I remember being told that I sounded nasally. And, maybe that's true. I remember watching singing competition shows together and hearing her compliment singers for doing things with their voices that sounded to me like things my voice naturally did. And I remember wondering, what is the difference? Why is that beautiful when their voice does it, but annoying when mine does? And again, I don't know if I'm a good singer. And I think that's important because this isn't secretly a story about discovering that I have an amazing voice. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. That's not the point. When I was little, I didn't care whether I was good. I wasn't performing. Singing felt good. That's it. I loved the vibration. I loved carrying a note. I loved feeling sound move through my throat. And somewhere along the way, something that had once been sensory became social. Something I experienced became something I imagined other people evaluating. And eventually, I stopped. Learning to become quiet. I wonder how many of us have something like that. Something completely innocent that we learn to become embarrassed about. Maybe you sang. Maybe you danced. Maybe you made sounds. Maybe you rocked back and forth. Maybe you talked endlessly about something that fascinated you. Maybe you laughed really loudly. Maybe you wore something unusual. Maybe you drew. Maybe you collected rocks or bugs or leaves or whatever strange little treasure made your brain light up. And then somebody noticed. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they rolled their eyes. Maybe they called you annoying. Maybe they told you that you were too old for that. Too loud. Too sensitive. Too dramatic. Too weird. Too much. And maybe nobody ever explicitly told you, I need you to become less of yourself. They didn't have to. Sometimes all it takes is enough little moments of humiliation. Eventually, we learn to do the silencing for them. And here's the part I've been thinking about the most. Because technically, I can still sing. There's nothing physically preventing me from doing it. Sometimes one of my favorite songs come on and I desperately want to sing with it. I can feel the impulse. My body knows what it wants to do. And then almost as quickly, something else arrives. Embarrassment. Panic. That horrible self-conscious feeling. Sometimes I get shaky. Sometimes it becomes so intense I feel like I could pass out. And so I don't sing. But I've realized I do something strange instead. I flex my vocal cords without making a sound. I shape the note inside of my throat. No voice comes out, but I can almost recreate the physical sensation of singing. A silent note. And when I really thought about what I was doing, that broke my heart a little. Because some part of me is still trying to sing. She just learned how to do it quietly. Maybe that's what so many of these parts of ourselves have done. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe they adapted. Maybe they learned how to survive without being noticed. And maybe that changes the question. Instead of asking, where did that part of me go? Maybe I should be asking, where is she hiding? Because my muscles still remember movement. My throat still remembers notes. My body still responds to music. The impulse is still there. Maybe the person I've been looking for didn't disappear. Maybe she just learned how not to be seen. Roger, permission, and baby steps. After episode 2, something happened that I wasn't expecting. A man named Roger left me a beautiful message. Before recording this episode, I reached out and asked whether I could share his name and his story here. And he said yes. So Roger, thank you for trusting me with this. Roger told me that he used to make clicking sounds. He found them relaxing. But people around him called it annoying and told him to stop. And eventually he did. For years. Then, as he began healing, he started clicking again. At first only when he was alone. And one day his nephew heard him. But instead of laughing or telling him to stop, his nephew was fascinated. He wanted to know how Roger did it. Eventually, Roger began allowing himself to make those sounds around other people again. And then Roger said something to me. He told me he hoped someday I would sing again, even if it was only for myself. And I haven't stopped thinking about that. Because Roger and I weren't really talking about clicking, and we weren't really talking about singing. We were talking about permission. What happens when something innocent and instinctive inside of us is repeatedly met with ridicule? And what might happen if, years later, we finally tell that part of ourselves, "You don't have to hide from me. I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to tell you to stop. You can be here." And this is where the prettier version of this story would probably have me tell you that I started singing again, that I had some enormous breakthrough. Maybe I'd even sing something into this microphone and we'd have this beautiful full circle podcast moment. But that's not what happened. I'm not there yet. I still get scared. I still become painfully self-conscious. I still sometimes feel that urge to sing and stop myself before sound ever leaves my mouth. And I'm trying to be okay with that because I don't want healing to become another performance. I don't want to sing again to become another expectation I'm failing to meet. Maybe I'm not ready, and maybe that's okay. But then I thought, wait, maybe I have started. Not singing, but this, the podcast. I'm sitting in front of a microphone. I'm speaking. I'm telling you things I've spent years barely being able to tell myself. I'm allowing my voice to exist outside of my own head. And then people are actually hearing it. That's terrifying when I really think about it. But I'm doing it anyway. Maybe this is one of my baby steps. And baby steps matter. Maybe reclaiming yourself doesn't begin by doing the thing you're most afraid to do. Maybe it begins by doing one thing that makes the next thing slightly more possible. Maybe today I speak. Maybe someday I hum. Maybe someday after that, I sing. I don't know. And for once, I don't think I need to know. Who am I when I'm not afraid to be witnessed? I'm beginning to understand that I don't have to drag these pieces of myself out of hiding just to prove I've healed. Maybe my job is simply to make the environment a little safer and let them decide when they're ready to come out. I've asked myself before, who would I have been if nobody had taught me to be afraid? And I still think there's something worth exploring in that question. But I'm beginning to think there's another question that's more useful. Who am I when I'm not afraid of being witnessed? Because that little girl I remember, the one lost in her own world, maybe I don't need to become her again. I can't. I've lived too much life. I've changed. I've become a mother. I've survived things she couldn't have imagined. And I'm not trying to travel backwards. But maybe she left me clues. Music, movement, sound, curiosity, joy without an audience. Maybe those aren't instructions for who I'm supposed to become. Maybe they're simply little reminders. This feels like me. So before we leave the hearth today, I want to ask you something. What did you stop doing? Not because you stopped loving it, because you became aware somebody else was watching. What sound did you stop making? What clothes did you stop wearing? What did you stop drawing? How did you stop dancing? What interests did you learn not to talk about? When did your laugh become quieter? When did excitement become embarrassing? What part of yourself did you decide was simply too much? You don't have to reclaim it today. I'm certainly not going to sit here and tell you to do something I'm not ready to do myself. And maybe we don't need another assignment. Maybe we just notice. And if something tiny inside of you still wants to move, or make noise, or create, or play, or sing, maybe this time we don't immediately tell it to be quiet. Maybe we listen. Because you might not be meeting someone new. You might be hearing from someone who has been with you for a very long time. I don't know where all this is taking me. And I think that's becoming one of my favorite things about these conversations. I'm not speaking to you from the other side of some perfectly completed healing journey. I'm figuring it out while I'm sitting here with you. And right now, I'm speaking into a microphone. That's my baby step. Maybe you have one too. And maybe that's enough for today. Take what you need, leave what you don't. Come back whenever you need somewhere warm to sit. Until next time, come closer to the hearth. The fire is always lit.